computer. Mike, I've heard you mention the word praxis and how that relates to organizations and organizational activity. Let's get into that a little bit. What does praxis have to do with being a great organization?
Okay, well, praxis is obviously some strange word. It's a Greek word.
What does it mean?
But yeah, praxis is a combination of practice and theory or thinking.
Mm.
So praxis is, like a derivative. It's practical. It's focused on what you do. And it's also the combination with theory. So don't go running around doing stuff without a theory, and don't go pursuing theory without actions coming from it and supporting it or not. And that then you get the basic feel for, is this idea right? Well, we're going to put it into practice and see ongoingly. And is what we're doing, the practice right? Well, we keep checking the theories that we've got. And so it's constantly both. And we've been taught, I think, the guy that taught me this was a philosophy professor who was brilliant and, world renowned in his part of that field. But he was also, everything he touched in business turned to gold. Everything he touched made tons of money. Midas Mufflers was his. He's not Midas. Midas Mufflers was the family name of the business. And one of the Midas family came to one of his workshops and said to Howard, is the name of this guy, said to Howard, will you come and consult our company? And Howard wasn't really interested in business. He said, why would I want to do that? And the guy said, well, we think you could help us. Do you think you could help us? And he said, of course, it's only a problem in philosophy here. So he took over, and that's when the Midas system, he turned it into a franchise system. Because he kind of analyzed it and went, okay, well, what are the chunks aren't working? Is we're putting in all the capital. These people are putting in the energy, but they have no skin in the game. So we need a formula where your skin in the game and our skin in the game is the same. And he traveled around and did some of his things. And he said, and franchising back then, when Midas turned into franchise, was pretty new stuff. And he turned it into a franchise system. Then his son took over a couple of their franchises and made a fortune. Who knew nothing about the business. He just did what his dad said, basically. But he learned there. So it's completely simple, but it's really contrary. If you say, well, we need a theory here, and people go, no, we need action, or vice versa. No, you need both.
Well, talk to me a little more and maybe shape out my thinking about what is theory in the context of business? What kind of theory? What are you talking about?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think of it. He may have thought of it more deeply than the way I think of it, but I think of it as two things, really. One, there's a theory you have of your business called what people want in relation to what you want to give them. And you develop a theory about that. But also there's models. And the model and what you want to give them are kind of going together, but we're not into action yet. But if you only go to theory and don't look at the models intellectually as design things, then your action's going to go all over the place. So his model was based on, for him, it was really a business model. It didn't have to be a franchise, but it was based on looking at the business as it existed, which was, it had been dominant in the muffler field because it was the best mufflers, because they advertised, I don't know. But he looked at it and said, this could be way better. because you're putting in all the capital, and these people are running a business that they have no real interest in. I mean, some people work harder and some work less, but they don't have any skin in the game. So my theory is each one of those distinct elements, like each shop, Midas shop, needs to have capital input and energetic input, because who puts the capital in has skin in the game by their capital. So now you've got maximum energy being put into the business by somebody who's right there on the spot.
Okay, so that his theory was if someone has invested significant capital in a business, they'll be more likely to promote it and energetically make it a good system.
Yeah.
That was his theory.
Yes.
Got it.
So how do you do that? Well, there's probably ways other than franchising, but it's more difficult. But do franchising, that's what it's made for, in his view.
Good. Yeah, but the theory is a higher level
Yeah.
abstraction than franchising, which is an application of that theory.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can you give me another example of a theory that you've seen in business that maybe didn't work, a bad theory?
Well, I don't know whether I may have not seen any bad theories, but certainly not many. But I've seen a huge lack of any theory at all.
Talk to me about that. How do businesses look when they operate with no theory? Or what have you seen about that?
I think usually there has been a founder who made something out of the business. In this case, like the Midas family. But who do I want to use? Well, chemical plants in Monsanto. I went to a chemical plant, and they all do the same kind of thing. You know, they were inherited. Those chemical plants most of them were built during the war years to make chemicals for that effort. So here's what you do. You hire a bunch of people, and you supervise them. You don't just manage them. You supervise them closely and tell them exactly what you want them to do, and then try and make them do it with energy and stuff. But it's also, if you had to make more of it than it is and say it's the theory that they were running, the theory they'd be running is build a factory and then make people that will produce the result we want, and then make people do what they're supposed to do. That's it. So I went down to a plant that was losing money and failing. And the second piece, it was not quite that's it. Because you treat people like that, that's what people form unions for. Because they're being dehumanized and beat up and rigidly, So on one hand, they slack off and don't give you much. But on the other hand, they want to try and get more money and whatever else the unions want to get, which is, just humans operating, makes sense. The company they can't deal with, so they'll form a union, and then the company will have to deal with it to some extent. Of course, they missed the second theory, which is, but then the union has a management structure, and they don't care about you either. They only really care about their positions as union, getting paid to do nothing but file complaints against the company, things like that. But if we leave that aside, all unions aren't like that, but mostly. But the theory is, we'll build the plant, we'll tell the people what to do, and it'll produce profits. Only this particular plant, which had 3 lines, it was a major plant in the system, and the manager they sent down to try and close the plant down because of the people they were shooting into that plant. This was a nasty place. It was hillbillies in West Virginia who didn't take things lightly, took them personally. And they weren't doing what they were, quote, supposed to do. And the management there and the supervisors weren't doing it. So it wasn't working. And the only answer they had was, we're closing the whole thing down. And if you start to close the chemical operation down, you don't build it up again because of pollution and all kinds of costs that are involved in that kind of stuff. Less than a year later, this was the top ranked chemical plant in the system. What changed? Well, the theory of the guy who went down there, he went down to run it like the company runs it. And then he saw there was a whole town here that was going to be, what were these people going to do? It's a little small place and the chemical plant shuts down. There's no town anymore. And he took that to heart. He was a great guy. And he was a tough guy too, but he was a great guy. And he had been in a little workshop I did. He called me down and said, what are we going to do? And I said, you could say it in simplistic terms, we're going to change the culture here. But I didn't use the word particularly. I just said, you need to work with these people, because he saw that and he wanted to save the plant. And everybody around him said it's impossible, which was another model theory. But I kind of said, look, what you need to do is start your management group and the union finding themselves on the same side and cooperating with each other. And then they will support you, help you put in place where people are valued, where they have an input, where they're, where their whole intelligence is involved. And the fact is, the model of a factory working in today's age is not telling people what to do and thinking they're going to do it. It's having people engaged in what they're doing and being part of a process and contributing full human stuff. So we did some fairly heavy, fairly confrontive workshops, at which after the first few days, each day some tough guy would be at the door saying, if you come back tomorrow, we're going to kill you or we're going to beat you up. Then I finally figured out it's just the way they talk down here, which it was. But then they began popping up in these big workshops, 200 or 300 at a time, with participative stuff and getting turned onto it. And sometimes they got nasty. And I always said, look, I don't care. I'm going home at the end of this. You're staying. So maybe you should change something here like that.
So you changed the theory, or you worked with the plant manager inside of a different theory, or I might call it a different context, which is that highly engaged people are highly productive people.
Yeah. And they would agree. They would have agreed if you were speaking about scientists, salespeople, and who knows, but not somebody on a basic production line. But yeah, the model applies there too, or the theory, or
beautiful. Yeah. Okay, those are great examples. I think I'll just say one more thing before we close this off. Well, actually, I'm going to say something and bring back to the word praxis. So what I want to say is just the example you gave is very, very similar to this, the example of the only remaining foundry in continental Europe, a brass foundry, which they were about to, like all the rest of them, they were losing their business to Asia. China in particular, and the fellow who was given the job of running the foundry created a new purpose, and his purpose was that this plant exists to provide a great livelihood for the men and their work here, their families, and keeping this community alive. I'm paraphrasing it, but he embedded the purpose of the business was to create a vibrant community.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he began to change in great way the way the plant was run, just as you described. One of the first things he did was took the lock off the tool room.
Right.
You didn't have to sign out for your tools. He trusted that you would give the tools back. If you needed them, you would take them. If you got done with them, you'd put them back. And, there was no pilferage, for example. Anyway, different theory, and the plant prospered wildly, and people are just as, and your example became so engaged, and he gave many beautiful examples of the kind of extraordinary engagement that these people would do, like when they thought that there was a chance that a shipment of parts to Volkswagen, the factory in Germany, is there might have been, I'm going to underline the word might, there might have been some defective bearings or whatever it was that they'd made. This guy on his own authority, some foreman or not an upper management at all, flew to Germany, got there before the shipment, and was there to greet the shipment at the Volkswagen plant, opened the boxes to make sure there wasn't any bad stuff been sent.
Yeah.
That level of ownership. Yeah. That's like, an owner. It's like a parent taking care of a child. It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
So you treat people like that, and in this case, they were. So it was a very, very different theory. So I'd like to.
Can I give you one more quick one?
Yeah, I was going to ask you another question, but go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, my question was just about Praxis. We started with Praxis, so we've delved down into theory. You gave me an example of your friend Howard changing the theory of the Midas muffler company to a theory of how to run their widespread business that was much, much better. Yeah. You gave me an example of a theory about how to run a factory that was failing, and then they changed to a different theory, and the factory was saved, as was the one in France. So those are examples of theories, good, bad, or missing, and their impact. So my question for you was to round back again to Praxis and see how Praxis and theory interact.
Okay, so we're saying in the example you gave, the brass foundry, or copper, whatever you said.
No, it's brass.
Was a theory of the business. And the significant part of the theory really was the relationship of people to machinery, process, etc. But the first Praxis, the guy said, here's what our vision is, or however he expressed it. And the first thing he did was take the locks off the storeroom. That's action.
Uh-huh.
He didn't try and teach people all this good stuff. He took the locks off the storeroom, and they all went, oh my God, they trust me.
I get it.
So that's how, and then he kept doing things, right? It wasn't just one little move.
Yeah, no, it's lots.
But the thing is, so the first move, some people got it immediately, and some people went, yeah, we'll see. That was easy for him to do. But as it builds, the people who are impacted by it builds, and pretty soon you got this culture you want, if you want to use the word, but pretty soon you got actions all over the place.
So you could say that Praxis then is the integration of theory and action. Is that the way you define it?
Yeah, but it kind of goes back and forth. The theory sort of predominates, but then the action doesn't quite match it. You don't go back to theory straight away. You look at your action. And so you keep crossing, which am I doing? And kind of you begin to get it like it's always both. It's theory and action all of the time, iterative back and forth like that.
Well, not to get too weird, but this is also very much like Heidegger talking about there's never any being by itself. It's always being in the world, which then is expression of creating.
I think it's a great saying. I mean, I think it's a great line, saying, in the whole book title, and great stuff. But a lot of people roll their eyes at that. But let me give you this example, because this should get most people's eyes rolling. It really got my eyes rolling. Somebody told me in Seattle, there was a smallish factory. They had probably 100 employees, could have been 2, because I didn't work with them. I just spent some time with the guy who was the general manager of it. Turned out he didn't own it, but he was the chief guy, CEO. And what they made, it's the most basic thing in the world. What they made was cement pipes that did the bend. So, everybody could make straight pipes. These guys only made the bends of the cement pipe, whatever it was, like that. And they were snapping at the heels of one of the giant GE or something, I don't know who it was, but one of the giants in the field. And they'd come up from nothing down there. And I went down and I said, so somebody told me it was different. He was a great guy. I said, so what's different here? He said, well, I don't know. I guess it's everybody has a say about everything. And I kind of went, what? And I was much more a straight-laced management guy in those early days. I mean, I liked it, but like what? And he said, well, if anybody wants a pay raise, they put a note up on this notice board here that says, I need a pay raise because my wife's, whatever, you know, they give a little reason. They don't give a reason, whatever. They put their little note up. I want X raise. And they usually put a number on it, but they don't have to, just I need a raise. And there's this bulletin board. And then everybody who wants to, which is almost everybody, because they do want to participate, they would put up whether or not they thought he should get a raise and how much. And at the end of a week or whatever the time was, the general manager looked at it, averaged out what was assessed to the guy, and that's what he got. And I went, what? This is like socialism or something, isn't it? He said, no, it's just a way of working. But there it was on the bulletin board and happening. I said, wow, and the managers? He said, well, we don't really have any managers except me. And mine goes up too. They decide what I get. It totally blew me away. And they were skyrocketing. And then what happened? Well, somebody, because he didn't own the company, the owner sold the company. And the new owners came in and said, what? You're not doing that. We're doing all this stuff. And guess what happened to the company? Downhill. Because the theory disappeared, and then the actions followed that.
This will lead to yet another discussion called why you have to be transformative, or why it is once you reach the edge of your system, if you don't keep transforming the systems you're embedded in the dominant culture will crush you again.
Yep. Yep.
Which that little example of the cement elbow factory gives a sad but true example of that. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about Praxis, the marriage of theory and action.
That was good. Nobody ever asked me about Praxis, even though the book's titled that. A book's titled that.
All right.